Hey there, everyone. My name is Jonathan Christian, and I'm one of the pastors here at the Church of 1122 here in Jacksonville, Florida. And today we're going to dive into the wonderful world of foster care. And specifically, we're going to get to hear from my friends here, the Moody's. This is Kayla and Evan Moody, and then also my friends, the Jackson family with Matt and Ashley Jackson. And they're going to just, through their honest stories, their authenticity, their vulnerability, they're going to give us some tips, some tricks, just some practical insight into this journey of fostering, and then really just being like Jesus would want us to be when it comes to those that are vulnerable out there in the world. And they're really, I think what they're going to do through their story and through the questions that you have and that they're going to answer, I really do believe that this is going to be an opportunity for you to walk away with a better sense of how to better advocate for children in general. I think it's going to give us the opportunity to understand how we can set realistic expectations when it comes to the world of foster care. And then finally, I think it's going to give us all a better understanding of just how to navigate the system in general. I mean, overall, if we're being honest, it can be overwhelming. It can be misunderstood, the foster care world. So I think we're going to hopefully shed some light on that. So Jackson family and Moody family, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
you want to dive right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's dive right in. In your stories earlier, of course, you shared a little bit about your family's heart of why you said yes to being foster parents, which we're so glad you did. But would you also, just on the flip side of that coin, would you be willing to just to share with us, what could have maybe stopped you from saying yes to being foster parents? And anyone can go.
I'll let you guys go first on this.
Okay.
I'll start. Comfort. I think for me, that would be the most important, or the easiest thing to say. That would be the easiest way to not do it. My comfort level in taking on more kids, if I'm being brutally honest, was like, I'm pretty comfortable without having to take care of more kids, dogs, whatever it is what I got at home. I'm a financial advisor. And so my job is to make people comfortable in a way, in their retirement. And so naturally, it's not something that just comes, as something that I just like, you know what I need in my life? Another kid right now. So it's just, my comfort level is important to many people, but God has other plans. So, that's just kind of the first thing that comes to mind with that question.
Great. Yeah. How about y'all? What else? What would you add to that?
I would say career too. I know that Kayla and I, being a military family, we've moved around a fair amount, and through my background in the dental field, there's always the next step, next test to study for, board exams, etc. And there just was not a really good time, so it seemed, to say yes. So I would say that gave me pause.
And, I think overall this concept of waiting for the right time, right? Of when is this going to be the time for us to jump into foster care? And I've heard from so many families over the years that are kind of waiting for this. Okay, maybe if my kids get a little bit older, maybe if I'm a little bit more financially secure, maybe if this, maybe if that. And it's very similar in a way to starting a family in general. There's never going to be a right time for this, right?
Yeah. That's true.
And so it really is just that surrender of God is calling us to this right now, and just really like diving, into that and leaning in, we felt like.
Yeah.
So.
And I think too that whatever God calls us to, there's always going to be a reason that is easy to say no and to back out of. And so it's like you say, just jumping in and knowing, okay, God, this is what you want me to do. And so here I am, and I'm going to, hold it with open hands and just do whatever you've called me to do. But it, to Matt's point, it's not always comfortable, and it's not easy for sure.
Yeah. Specifically for you, Evan, and for you, Matt, I mean, you spoke about the career. You spoke also about, the comfort level. Just in general, I mean, from everything I'm learning about the foster care world, a lot of times it can be that there's that reluctant dad. I don't know if you can relate to that or not, but we're about to find out. If you were reluctant in the beginning, what were some of the things that would have made you reluctant to diving into this?
I think just the cost to our family. And I mean, that goes way beyond the financial aspect. The cost of, potentially not being able to be as free to travel. There's there's a lot of, and along with our journey, not that we were necessarily crazy, but I think that over the course of this journey, like we've lost the ability to have friends at times, even, being in a completely different stage in life, and doing court dates and everything else. We were just in a different phase.
Yeah.
And we, there weren't a lot of people around us that could relate to a lot of things.
That makes sense. Yeah. How about you, Matt? What would you say from the reluctant dad stance?
Plenty of that.
Yeah.
If I'd be lying if I said that I would be here today without this one right here, kind of being the driving force there. That's typically, I would say, how it goes. You've got a nurturing mom who, and then you've got a lazy dad like me or something like that who really doesn't want any more responsibility in life. If that's just, going back to the comfort thing, that's kind of where I was. But, it's one of those things where, you've got, I had 3 kids before I even started thinking about foster care, or before we even really started thinking about foster care. And, they were getting older. And so, it's like the thought of starting over is kind of like, but at the same time, you start thinking like, well, you know what? Starting over might keep me younger. I'm thinking of this selfishly too. I'm thinking of this very selfishly. It's like, all right, it might keep me a little bit younger, might keep me, and at the same time, look, what would it do for my kids if my kids saw me raise another kid? They're going to look at that like, wow, you guys really are living out the gospel. And again, we're no saints by any way, shape, or form, but I think at the end of the day, you're not going to look back and say, man, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So, there's lots of reluctantness from me, but again, I wouldn't change it. So
Nice.
Yeah.
And I would just to piggyback off that, this was a calling that God called Kayla to many years prior to us being actually licensed and taking the actual first tangible step into foster care. And, the Holy Spirit had brought her to a place where, it was a passion for her. And, I think that God used her to also speak into my life and to bring me over the finish line to say that first yes.
Yeah.
So
Good stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that just from the standpoint of, I know a lot of times the dads can be reluctant on it. I mean, but just in general, let's toss it back to you lovely ladies here. What would you say, Kayla and Ashley, are just some of those common, misconceptions, if you will, or like maybe just some of the biggest reasons that would hold people back in general from jumping headfirst into fostering?
I think that just in talking to people and friends and that are kind of like, what are y'all doing? What is this? Over the years, I feel like a lot of people say that they are afraid, well, how could you love a kid and then say goodbye? How could you do that? And that's hard. That's probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But those kids need somebody that's willing to love them like that, because not to their fault, they have found themselves in this situation where they have been taken away from, what they know to be their home and their family, and then they've been placed with strangers. A lot of times they have no idea who this foster family is. And so if they're just kind of loved, then, they need somebody a family that's willing to just really love them, just like as if it was their own biological child. And yeah, that is so hard when you have to say goodbye to these kids. But the hope, is that they do get to go home. And it's not if you're looking at their best interest, then that is the best, end for them. If that's a possibility.
Reunification.
Yeah, reunification. And so that's ultimately what you're rooting for. And you do have that in the back of your mind all the time. And so that's probably one of the biggest things I hear is, how can you do that? But it's just what they need.
Yeah. And we talked as well about, and you can touch on like the parameters that we can set within, as we walk into this as a foster parent.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to share a little bit more on that.
What do you mean about?
In the sense of like, how many children are you going to welcome?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I think that is a big thing because, a lot of people think that, when you say yes to foster care, you don't know what they're going to show up at your doorstep with. It might
or
be,
when.
Yeah, or when,
who,
or yes.
Yeah.
And so you can have some clarity with your licensing agency and tell them, you know what, right now, we're gonna put ourselves on hold because right now we're in a situation with our family. We can't take on kids right now. Or, hey, now we are open to this, and these are the ages, even down to, I can only take girls, whatever it may be. You are able to kind of set those parameters with your licensing agency so that they, so you get a child that is that's good for your family, that will fit in with your family. Yeah.
So then on that, sorry to interrupt, Kayla. So you can essentially say, I know some of my friends would say, I really want to maintain a certain birth order of our biological kids currently, et cetera. So you could say hypothetically, with whatever your opinion is on that, like we're open to a male or a female age 0 to 4 or 0 to 2 or 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, whatever. You can make those specifications and.
Let me jump in on that.
Yeah,
yes, you absolutely can, and you can do all that. They will still call you. They will still call you, but that is a.
We got 3 15-year-olds.
That's right.
Yeah.
But they will still call you. But that's kind of that's why we need more people.
Yeah.
That's why we need more people.
That's what their job is, ultimately.
Right.
Yeah. And for us, in almost 6 years of foster care, we've never taken one placement within the parameters that we had set.
Yeah.
So,
Us either.
And God was good in that as well. So I think another misconception is, and especially on like our kids that are coming into the foster care are here for no fault of their own. And so there's a misconception that maybe their behaviors or their choices have led them to be placed into the foster care system. And that part is absolutely not true. They need compassion and they need grace and they need love, just like any other child. And so putting that extra almost like blame on them or responsibility on them is absolutely a huge misconception in foster care. And I think as well, like how we navigate this with biological children in our home, God is not asking you to sacrifice them to foster care. And so setting like healthy boundaries in what you are able to take into your home is absolutely okay. And I believe 100% that you can do foster care with biological children in your home and ensuring everybody's safety as a part of that. But by no means is God asking you to say yes to a child that could possibly put your children into an unsafe situation.
Yeah.
And so what that looks like for us in different seasons is going to shift as to what we are able to be open to. But God is good and has a plan with that as well. So
that's so good, y'all. That's good. I mean, before we move on to maybe another section I want to move into, are there any other like just big misconceptions that you think that would be helpful for people to be aware of when it comes to everything that you've been through and have experienced, or maybe even just talking to other people that are figuring out the whole thing, when it just comes to children in foster care, other big misconceptions people should be aware of?
I mean, if I'm being really honest, when we first got into foster care, and this is just showing how like terrible of a person I am, I really did go into it thinking, oh, I want to save all these kids from these bad parents, bad, and that's terrible of me to say, but that's just honestly, that was my thought process.
And let me just jump in really quick and say one thing. We're
you
completely
were kind of the
different.
opposite.
We're completely different in everything. Well, in marriage and everything. Like I went into it thinking, how can I help the biological mom change the trajectory of her life? Like, I'm not going to do it. God's going to do it. But like, I'm going into it thinking,
you weren't in it to.
I'm not thinking, how can I get another kid to adopt? Like, that's not. I was into it to try to help the kids. Don't get me wrong, help the kids, but also help, be there as a support system for the biological mom, dad, whoever it might be that lost the kids. Because I can imagine I can't imagine, but I mean, they're probably going through quite a bit. I mean, it's in a world that we don't really know. So,
Yeah, I mean, and fostering to adopt, I mean, that in and of itself is a misconception, I think, but
I totally agree.
But I wasn't going into it thinking I wanted to adopt kids necessarily, but it was like, oh, well, let me be a safe haven. And you are to a certain extent. But I think what I realized really quickly is that, these families, these parents who've lost their kids, most of them, all of them probably didn't choose this path. Do you know what I mean? At some point, yeah, sure. Did they start making decisions? Sure. But they didn't wake up one morning and say, you know what, I want, my life to go this direction, so I don't even have my kids anymore, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, that was a big thing too, in realizing that I'm in it to, build a relationship with them and to, hopefully even one day help them, discover a relationship with Jesus and just partner with them and let them become like family. So they're not like these, it's not like you're against them. You're on the same team as this family. And I think that was a really big misconception for me, was thinking I was.
And it's scary to jump into that, right? Because all of the unknowns in how we work with biological families and how they get into this situation. But once again, it gives us such an ability to look at this with through the lens of grace, right?
Absolutely.
And if I were in those same situations, if I had been brought up in that same home, if I had been raised with those generational challenges that they're facing, where would I be? I'd be
the same
right
place.
there in the same place.
Right.
And so
they each have a story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think too, one of the biggest things that Evan and I have learned through this process is the sanctification of foster care, right?
Amen.
I never knew. Nobody told me, yes, this is about caring for vulnerable children and children in need of protection, but also in such a big part of this, as we do this work through the lens of the gospel, is what God is trying to do through us in our own lives, right? The things that he's working through as we enter this call. And, I think for Evan and I, especially, and as a mom, right? I'm a good mom. I can love all of these kids. It is the most humbling experience imaginable getting into foster care, realizing all the things that God needs to work out in me in this, and that's actually why all those years ago he put this on my heart. I feel because he's like, girlfriend,
this is going to take a while.
And so, I think that does give us such a better way to engage and look at, everybody.
Yeah.
And, what their role is and how much I have that is needing to be worked out in this, how much we in our marriage has, how much our biological kids have, that God is going to use us in that sanctification process.
That's so good. And I mean, one of the themes I'm picking up on so far, so y'all please correct me if I'm wrong, if you're going in with your lead foot being, let's do a trial run to maybe adopt them, then that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the goal here is reunification with biological mom.
now does it happen?
Does
it happen?
Sure.
No, we've adopted one. So it just didn't work out with the mom, and but we've also gone the other route.
Yeah.
To where at first the biological mom, this is our first placement, the biological mom wanted nothing to do with us, wouldn't even look at us in the courtroom, or would give us the evil eye.
Yeah.
And now she talks to her 5 times a week. So, and she's got her kids back and she's doing great. And she's, gotten saved and baptized and everything. So, but to your point, you got to go through it. You're not here. It's not a foster to adopt.
Yeah.
It's kind of a thing that we as foster probably.
And one thing I'm picking up on, again, correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm learning so much from y'all, it just sounds like just one step at a time more than it is I've mapped out a finish line and here's what I believe the finish line is going to look like. Right. I just feel like that's not realistic. It's going to have to be, we need to be faithful to the next step in front of us. And then if all of a sudden that leads down a path of reunification, a path of adoption, a pathway where they're with another loving family, I mean, you just are faithful to the next step in front of you is what I'm picking up. Evan, were you going to say something? Bud?
Yeah, just the fact that you have to relinquish any control over this process at the beginning. And that is so hard for anybody who's a planner and who wants to see the where it's going to end up. But trusting the Lord in that one daily step, and clinging to each other as well. That's probably one of the hardest things of foster care, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, that's good clarification. I want to shift gears a little bit. You've had some great answers so far, you guys. Let's just fast forward to when that child's in your house, or children, plural potentially, are in your house. When it comes to things like you have a family dynamic that you want to live by, your family have spoken and unspoken rules of how it's going to kind of work under your roof. What do you do in the situation where one of these kids is just not quite living up to that expectation when it comes to the Moody household, or when it comes to the Jackson household, here's how we're going to roll? What do you do in those kinds of situations where it gets challenging and maybe they're not quite respecting those rules or beliefs that you have?
Are we talking about our biological children?
I was about to say, is this any different?
Exactly right.
How is this any different? That's what I was about to say.
Oh, that's great. I guess it goes for them as well. But here, it's, in a perfect world, you kind of have some certain sets. I mean, maybe they're going to feel very differently about the way they view the world than you do. Or, how you, just when it comes to, it can be anything from like, here's how we're going to have dinner. Here's how dinner time works in our house, down to here's bedtime and curfew. I mean, all of those things wrapped into one.
I think back to what you guys were saying about control and just kind of one foot in front of the other. I think for us, we've had situations where, you just kind of meet these kids where they are. A lot of times, or some of our placements, we would get them and they might be 2 years old, but they're used to staying up until 1 a.m. and sleep until 11, and that's just not necessarily how my kids are functioning. And so you just meet them where they are and trust that eventually it will work out, but sometimes there is a little bit of that, or maybe it's down to they're not wanting to eat what we're eating. And I think for a time being, like, that's okay. Like they're going to make it if they want a bag of chips for dinner and not, my chicken and mashed potatoes and whatever. I think just sometimes you just kind of have to roll with it. And now that's not necessarily like behavior things, but, that's just kind of, you just don't know where they're coming from. And so I think giving as much grace and just being flexible and understanding and just kind of going along with that kind of stuff, I think is what has worked for us in our situation. I don't know about you guys.
Well, and just to piggyback her, you've got to realize where they've been. And they might be 5 years old and know nothing other than their mom and dad. And then they're coming into, even though that was a bad situation, probably, that's why they're not there anymore, that's all they know. And they're coming into somebody who they don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like,
naturally, they might act up.
Yeah, they might. It's just a natural thing that they're going to probably act out a little bit. Now, there might
products of their story.
Sure, but there might be some things that they look at and they go, "Wow, this is really healthy. This is So to her point, you just kind of gotta be a little gentle. But yeah, it's just like we were talking about joking earlier with our own biological kids. Our own biological kids, they're gonna say no, and
they're going to push boundaries.
They're going to push
back.
back.
They are.
They're children.
All kids do.
All kids do.
Right.
So they are going to need to conform, to the patterns of what how our family runs. We're not sitting here saying that we're going to just sit here and cater to their and they're going to run the show. But at the same time, it's just a little balance, especially at first, because you got to realize where they're coming from, where they're coming into. And, just take it one step at a time, I think.
And I think, I always try to put myself into the children's shoes of what removal day could look like, what the first week in our home looks like. And as an adult that can manage my feelings as well as I possibly can in any given day, right? But that I have all of this, these abilities, right? And so if somebody came to my house tomorrow with a bag and said, fill it up. You've got 10 minutes to get out of here.
Without
We're
any
taking
notice,
you. Yeah,
right.
no notice. We're taking you to live with a new family. You're going to not be with your children anymore. You're not going to see your, extended family anymore. You're not going to be on the teams. Like all of the routines that you had are just gone.
New school.
New
Yeah.
school, new
Yeah.
pets, new everything, new meals, new food, right? I'm going to have a certain way to feel
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
And even as an adult, I'm not going to be super thrilled.
Yeah.
And so I think, when we look at it like getting down and really trying to get in this with this child, like, what are my expectations for you today? And understanding that my role, and in the best sense of our roles is in foster care, is the healing that can happen in our home, right? And that is going to take time. And that's meeting them where they are in this moment and understanding that the brain is created in this magnificent way that it can experience healing, that God has designed it in such a way. And what does my role look like in that with the child? What does our family's role look like? But that initially I'm going to meet you where you are, and then
Yeah.
I'm
Over
going to
time.
wait and see
Right.
what God is going to do here. But
Yeah.
And knowing too that at any point something can happen to take them back, and there's more trauma that comes out, or they might act out for what you think is no reason, but actuality something happened that made them think about whatever it may be, that just causes some behaviors, and it's just loving them through all of that,
yeah.
which sometimes is easier said than done, for sure.
And we don't know
But-
what's triggered them
Right.
in that
We don't
moment.
know.
It could be one. It could be one small thing that has taken them back 2 years, 5
Yeah.
years. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And it's being so gracious in that
Yeah.
moment, right? In the way that Jesus does with us, and what an opportunity to engage in such a way of grace and compassion, and allowing them to come into my home and just immediately looking for the different gifts and the different talents and ways that we can celebrate them throughout that time. And I think you are a remarkable person. I think you are created in the image of God. And, what that's going to look like, I don't know. Are there going to be behaviors? Absolutely, right? We're expecting that going in. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to see growth and changes. And I think that's the privilege in foster care, that we get to witness that we get to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never really thought about. I mean, if let's just say that if the child or children that you have there, it's a 200-page story, if you will. I mean, you're not getting them on page 1.
No.
Right.
You're getting them on page 22 or page 48 or 99. I mean, and so it's just like if we were to start just randomly picked up a book and started reading on page 99, there's just a lot that you don't know that you have to kind of learn through the process to then continue on with the further pages
Right.
of their story to make them as good as possible. That's good. As the story continues to unfold with that theme, what has y'all's personal experience been with things like post reunification? After a child is reunified with the parents, or even in the whole co-parenting part of foster care, what has been your experience with that, y'all?
You go ahead.
That was something we have been licensed since 2018, and we had not experienced reunification until several months ago.
Okay.
And it was very hard. To your point, loving this child as your own for, 2 months, 10 months, 2 years, it doesn't matter. It's and the circumstances of the reunification too might play into that as well. But it was very hard on Kayla. It was very hard on our entire family.
That's the point.
Yeah, that is the point.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think for us and our experience, we have been able to celebrate with another family for their reunification. And I think for us, it's really like we talked about earlier, it's like they have now become an extension of our family.
Absolutely. And that is the best
Right.
ideal. And I think for us too, in post reunification, that is the ideal of foster care, that our family has. Our
Right.
family tree has extended by a branch, right?
Yeah.
And what a beautiful thing to see as well in
Yeah.
that.
It's funny, I think not too long ago, our 11-year-old, he was a little bit younger, but he had some school assignment and he included the brothers that we had for a little while. And so, I mean, literally, even down to my own children, we have now an extended family. And so I think it's just, for them and for her mom, it's being there for her. It's, if something happens to her car, she calls us. If there's work issues, if there's, whatever it may be, we're just like a home base kind of for her and for the boys for sure. And we've kind of tried to take on not grandma and grandpa. We're not that old. Maybe the aunt and uncle. The aunt and uncle role.
Yeah. Getting there.
Yeah, the aunt and uncle role. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like with this particular, reunification we're talking about, it started to where, this was our very first placement that we ever got. Mm-hmm. And this was, 5-6 years ago that we ever got. And it started for me with, if I'm being honest, a little bit angry. I'm just like, you've got, when you're dealing with foster care, you've got visits and you've got certain things that, it takes time. I mean, it takes, and I was angry. I mean, I was angry. I'm like, why am I spending my time going out of my way when you should be, at the end of the day, fast forward about 6 months later, after, we were doing visits and doing all this, and I got to meet the mom and do all this, it was like, all right, this is why I've been called to go out of my way. It's like, it's to love on the mom and to, show her that we're there for her and all this stuff. And then you fast forward to today, and it's a pretty incredible, relationship that we have with her. And so it makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
And you couldn't see it at the time because you're like, I'm not driving 45 minutes. You're crazy. I'm not, for you to see your kid that you lost. No, thank you. And that's just the enemy coming after you saying,
Sure.
Why to throw in the towel? That's where I think you just faithfully put one step in front of the other, like we talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think,
trust God.
This is going to, when we're talking about post-reunification and co-parenting in a sense, it is still going to require some healthy boundaries and expectations
100%.
of what this looks like for us. But ultimately, this is still my ability to care for this child who I loved just as much as any of the other children in my home that no longer is with me. And praise God that I still have an invitation, that we still have an invitation into that. And, that is, once again, like, there's different challenges and as we work through that, both on her side and ours. But once again, like, this is the best interest of the child. And oftentimes our biological families don't have healthy support systems. Right. So who is she going to call, right? And we want to be that call, right? Yeah. Like, we love this kid. We want to ensure his safety in any way possible. And we want it to be with us if we still are needed in that role. And so I think of it as once again, like, just the ability to love him in the role that we have been given now.
Well, and to your point really quick, when you mentioned boundaries. So boundaries were huge when, with reunification. I'm not trying to, pay for the parents' rent and pay for, I'm not here to just give handouts, But if the kid needs a birthday party,
Absolutely.
and they can't afford a birthday party, let me help throw a birthday party for the kid. And let me be that, like you said, the uncle, or, let me, if the mom is in a jam here or there, let me help fix her car, or, or what it's
babysit.
not, or babysit, or babysit, or take them for a night so she can just have a break. Every situation is different, but I do think that, having the boundaries, but, setting them depending on the situation up front and talking about them as a, husband and wife or whatever, is a very good, and it's been great. I mean, it's just been, in our situation at least, it's been great. And I know a lot of other ones that have been great too. So.
Yeah.
Well, and whether it goes well or it does not go well and has a dream ending or it doesn't, one thing I think there's a lot of commonality. The whole thing just smells like the gospel to me. I mean, just everything about the world of foster care smells like the good news of Jesus Christ, because just as, you're getting frustrated with the child or with their biological mom or dad. I mean, as soon as I get that, I to be honest, Matt, I could get there myself, I'm sure. I flip that mirror around and go, oh, I was the unlovable one. I was the unlovable one, in air quotes, I should say. I was the vulnerable one who had no way of getting myself out of this jam unless someone was willing to sacrificially and unconditionally love me and help me get out of it.
Right.
I mean, so that's awesome. So with that, I mean, my mom always said growing up, y'all, new levels, new devils. And as you dive into this world and you have a foster child come into your house, what would you say, Ben, is the enemy doesn't want that. He doesn't want that you living out the gospel to that child, to your own biological kids, to your friends, to your family, to your coworkers, to your neighbors. He doesn't want that. So, what would you say has been the hardest part for you in your foster journey personally?
I feel like for me personally, I feel like probably you too, and even our whole family, like our kids included. It's the foster care is a roller coaster. I mean, it genuinely is an up and down, and you never know. And to you guys' point, that God was working on something in me. It's control. Like, I am the planner. I am the one that needs to know the answers. And when you're waiting on a broken system to try to answer your questions about what is happening next, or you think that this child's going to be with you and then it turns left and suddenly they're going home, or whatever it may be, like that whole up and down roller coaster is so emotionally hard, for somebody, especially somebody like me that is a control, wants to kind of have all her ducks in a row.
Yeah.
That was hard. That was hard to be mentally in a place that I could handle all of the unknowns and all of the, turns here and there and the ups and downs, but then also be there for my family. And, that was really hard.
Yeah, I mean, one question that we all get as foster is like, how long are you going to have them? It's like,
your guess is as good as mine.
I can predict that.
Or are you going to adopt?
Yeah.
How long are you going to have them? Are you going to adopt? And it's just like, to her point, it's like,
I don't
it's
know.
just really...
I always told people I love the movie Mary Poppins. It's my favorite. And so whenever they would ask how long we're going to have them, I always said they'll stay until the wind changes.
There you go.
I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Well, and then there's a lot of factors that, and just, there's many factors. I mean, it has to do with, if the parents are going through their case study, it has to do with the legal system. It has to do with the caseworker who might be there today, might not be there tomorrow. There's many, many, many factors. So when people ask that question, you just kind of are like, so for us, and to your point, I mean, it's just the unknown. I mean, it's just the complete unknown as to how long you're going to have them, to whether you're going to have them forever. It just, you don't know.
Yeah. I would think of just like anything in life, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, practicing good communication with those around you is the key. So for example, I mean, hey, we love having this child or children in our life, but in 6 months we have the family reunion in California or something. I mean, let me just go there. I've heard my friends use terms like respite care, and I'm not even 100% sure what it all means. So maybe you can shine some light on that as well. But what do you do when you're like, in a month, we have hey babe, and we have the family reunion in California, and we have these children, these foster children that we love, but that's probably not the best idea for them to go to the family reunion with us. Or I really could use a break for a weekend. Or how does that work? And with things like respite care, I've heard and stuff like that.
And that is such an individual, part of foster care as well. Whether or not we utilize respite care, and especially families that are really struggling with behaviors and kind of in the trenches and in the heart of foster care, a lot of times they don't want to utilize respite care because this
what
isn't
is respite care?
It's a short term. Maybe it's 2 days, or maybe it's up to a week or two,
I'm
depending on.
licensed and I'll take him for the weekend
Yep.
for you.
Yep.
Or, hey, you no problem that you have the family reunion. We'll take him for the week.
And
kind of thing?
sometimes,
Okay.
maybe something short notice comes up. You have a funeral or something,
Yeah.
and you cannot take children from the foster care system out of the state unless if you have permission.
That's good to
And
know.
so, on a short term, that makes it challenging. And so, but especially for our families who are really in the trenches, and this is not something that they would do as parents typically. They would not send their child in their home to somebody else that they don't really have a relationship with. And that is it's a challenge for us in foster care. But if that's what it takes to extend the life of the child in your home, then we do whatever it takes
Right.
to give that child the stability of the time that they are with you. And so it's been interesting in conversations and, walking alongside other foster families in this. It's not always going to look like how we have parented in the last 5 to 10 years ourselves.
And that's okay.
That's okay. What matters the most is the stability that the children have in our home. So if you did not put your kids in daycare and you never imagined putting your children in daycare, but daycare is going to be, enough room for you to get the things done that you need to get done and have grace, then you put this child in daycare. Actually, in a lot of states, they're going to require it anyway. But I think being free.
Sorry to interrupt. Who pays for that then? I mean, is that that's out of your pocket?
In
That
the state
your
of
wallet?
Florida, and I think, nationally, there are like vouchers that are going to help
okay.
cover, those costs as well. And so it's kind of, you're going to get turned upside down a little bit in how we parent and how we navigate that. But once again, it's not about how we've done it in the past. It's about the permanence of the child in our home for whatever that season looks like, and them staying with us for the longest until permanency is reached, which will depend from child to child and case to case. That part, not how I've done it in the past, how I, want to do this, but yet like for the child in the best interest of the child.
And I think what to piggyback on what you're saying, and you talking about respite care. Listen, respite care is important. If you don't want to take in foster, then respite care is great. Some kids, I think, going to respite care might, for a weekend. It's just, especially if it's just right at after they got taken, it's just like, where am I going? I'm going all over the place. And I think that's kind of what you're hitting on a little bit, is like, maybe that's not the best of ideas for some people.
Yeah.
It just depends on the situation though. But to your point, if taking them out of the situation right now with the biological parents is the better idea, and you taking them and then them going to respite care for a little bit is a better situation than the alternative, which is keeping them with their parents that is in a bad situation until they can get help or whatever it is they need. So respite care is important. Some people just need a break every now and again, and that's great. But at the same time, I think doing the best you can to let them fit in with your family is
And I think too, like when we talk about, respite care and, any of the like the hard of foster care, which is ultimately, in this saying goodbye, right? Or in the waiting, in the lack of control, all of the different, in the roller coasters, all of the different layers that foster care is going to bring inevitably to us, to our families. This idea of like best interest of the child, right? And I think the hard parts are what is going to keep people out of this. And it's them and their mind running through, how am I ever going to do all of these things? And
Yeah, it makes sense.
And the reality is that is where grace and God comes in, and he fills in all of the holes and the gaps of that. We can do hard things because Jesus does hard things, right? And so I would say, like, don't let the fears and the concerns of the broken system or the lack of control or the roller coaster or saying goodbye keep you from this, because for us, saying goodbye has been the hardest part. And it just completely broke me, right? But on the flip side of that, we had the privilege to love and care for one of the most magical children that I have ever met. And had I not said yes, had I been
Right.
so concerned about how I would be so broken by this, that I would not have been able to get eye level with the image of God and love on this person the way that we did for the time that he was with us. And so it's not so much the fears of loss that should be driving you in this. It's the ability to love that should be pushing us into it.
While you have them. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good. I would imagine, I mean, because we serve a good God who, knows everything and has all of our days preordained for us, I would imagine that as you were in the middle of your foster journey, you probably had these aha moments. You're like, oh my gosh, God, you were preparing me all along for this. Last week when I went through that thing 5 years ago in your own childhood, have you personally had some experiences where you're like, oh my gosh, my past experiences in life in general, in some ways were prepping me for being a foster parent?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I feel like there's so many things. For me personally, when I was in 6th grade, I remember I was at a summer camp with my youth group, and I don't even know that I remember all that was talked about, but God like clearly called me to just love kids, and I really didn't even know what that meant, or how that was going to play out, and and so fast forward, we get married and we have 3 kids pretty quickly, and he knew that was something that I felt called to. I don't know if this is adoption, I don't know if this is foster care, I don't know what this is, and
I did not have that call.
yeah, he was kind of like, well, we've got 3 kids, so looks like you got 3 of them to love. And so, yeah, I mean, it was through us going on a mission trip that I felt like really prepared us. I mean, we went, on the other side of the world, and, I could have taken home every single one of those kids that we got to interact with. And I didn't know them. We didn't have the same background. We didn't come from this. I mean, there's nothing, in common other than, God made you and God made me, and we're here together and let's love them together kind of a thing. And so I left literally thinking I could take all of them home with me. And then, also, God is just good like this, that our leader of our church or of our trip was a foster parent themselves. And so they kind of pointed us in that direction. And here we are. But I feel like, just little bits over my life of God just sprinkling in little things here and there that just kind of kept that, in my mind, that he was definitely calling us to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I think, for Evan and I specifically, I kind of share with people that our role in foster care started so many years before we became foster parents. And so a little bit of our story is our oldest son is almost 17 and he is on the autism spectrum. And man, we think he is just incredible. Like, we're so proud of him, and he's so delightful. And yes, he's quirky. And yes, I don't want him to walk up and say things to strangers on the street, because he'll maybe say something that is like very pointed and directed at them. And so, but I think, once I had learned more about foster care, I understood that if he were placed in the foster care system, that this label of autism would be almost like a scarlet letter for my child to bear, and that he would be considered hard to place, and that finding a home for him would be almost nearly impossible. And I was like, how is this a thing? Because he is remarkable. Like, and I mean, yes, we're very, proud of him, but ultimately for us, that label of autism was something that, and this was not a plan that we ever had as parents. Having your oldest child diagnosed with autism, there was a season of even grief for
Denial.
me. Denial. Yeah. Building up to that. Like, this is not what we had planned. But ultimately, I think that for all of us, when we start the steps of becoming foster parents and we're in these classes, we can look at these situations that we've been through that have been hard, that we did not expect, that were not our plans, and say, how is God going to redeem this in such a way that walking through that hard or healing in that season is going to be beneficial to a child that's going to come into our home. And so now we really felt like we had this unique set of parenting skills, of advocacy and, pushing through like insurance and all of this in order to, welcome kids with, autism or other medical needs into our home, that we could offer them, right? Like this hard season, this thing that we did not plan on can now be used. God had such a purpose. I 100% see that, and why we walk through that and how we've been able to walk out our time in foster care. And we had one little guy that came to us several years ago, and sometimes trauma looks like autism initially, and so you're kind of trying to weigh some of these out. But yeah, once we figured out this is for sure like autism, and we need to help him walk through that. I was in and talking with this neuropsychologist. He had just diagnosed this little guy with autism, and he's writing some notes on the paper. And he said, autism, global delay, and then he said 1,000 words behind, and he wrote that on this notepad. And just the weight of 1,000 words behind just hit me.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of there with just that heaviness of how much we have to overcome with this little person, right? And yet we were in church a few weeks later. We were in the middle of worship, and to keep him quiet, we were feeding him snacks, and he was sitting in Evan's lap. And so I was saying more, and then I would give him one, and then I was saying more, and then I would give him one. And we always said that he could be a piano player. He had the longest, skinny little fingers, and he brought them up and he touched them together in the middle of worship. And Evan and I lost our ever-loving mind, right?
Yeah.
And I thought in that moment, it's not the 999 I'm worried about today. It's the one that we're going to celebrate. It's more, right? And that is the gift of, especially as we care for children with special needs or these diagnoses in the foster care system, is that the world may not celebrate the one because they're going to look at the 999. In our home, we're going to celebrate the one. Your level of success looks different than other children's level of success, but that doesn't matter when you're under our roof. Like, man, we're going to party. You're going to do all of these things. And then Evan and I, we're going to fight for you, and we're going to get these services into place. And I'm getting so fired up about that this is what God called us to specifically. But yeah, I'm going to get to witness you grow in my home. And, and I think too, as foster families, if we think about special needs, or there is such a high need for families who are willing to consider taking kids that have some sort of a special need in the foster care system. There's such a high rate of our kids that have these. And we can't necessarily just go in and say, no, I can't do this. And I think once again, that's a control piece. But we have to just be open to what God is really asking us. And especially with our kids that have special needs, that have medical diagnoses, we see so much growth in them in our home. So don't discount them and don't count them out. And whatever God has used you that was such a struggle and a challenge as a mother for your kids, allow that to drive you and that passion to help, get them the help that they need while they're with you.
That's so good, Kayla. I'm going to flip it up just a little bit. I mean, we all know that whenever you're going to make a great meal or a great cake, the key there is it's all about the ingredients you have. It's all about the key ingredients, the best ingredients that you have available to you. So just taking that imagery when it comes to just creating the ideal foster care, the foster family, foster environment, if you will, what do you think are the key ingredients that stick out to you of you have to be able to be X, Y, and Z for you to really have a thriving foster home?
I think a lot of patience and a lot of grace.
Yeah.
Okay, patience and grace.
And Kayla and I both would agree that, bringing our biological kids, we always kept their birth order intact. So we had younger placements, but having them be such a vital role in inviting children into our home and making them, walk along with us through this journey and get to see like their faith and our faith in action was. And I've always said, like, how has this affected our kids? Thank you. They would even tell you that they wouldn't change it at all. And just the fact that the stirring of their heart for the fatherless has just been really amazing to see.
Yeah.
I think too. I'll add just clarity, right? Like in the communication between Evan and I, and where we're at and whatever season it is and what that looks like. But if you're as that target, right, like gets bigger on you, it is going to get so much bigger on your marriage.
Yeah.
And so a healthy marriage going into this and maintaining a healthy marriage through foster care is vital.
Yeah.
It is, you can't do it honestly without it. And so a thriving foster home looks like a thriving marriage as well. And it is possible. It just takes being very intentional about what your marriage looks like in this as well. So,
and I think back to what we said earlier, knowing your boundaries, like not everybody is equipped to take, a teenage foster placement. Not everybody wants a newborn foster placement. I think just knowing what works for your family, I think is really important, and where you are in your season of your life with your kids and your spouse. And then I think, having a community that you're doing life with is so important, because, these crazy, weird emotions that you go through in foster care, sometimes, you feel isolated and like, well, nobody gets what I'm feeling. Like nobody understands how I could be having a hard day, with these two precious little babies, or I don't know how whatever it may be. I think just having a community of people, one that just you're doing life with, that might bring a meal, that might, whatever it might look like. For us, it was our disciple group here, our group here with the church. And then also having a group of other foster families that know what you're going through, that have been there, that can relate, that can just say, yeah, I get what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And, it sucks right now, or celebrate with you whenever the child does go home, or whatever it might look like. So I think for us, that was really important
And I think too, you touched on something that is so important, especially for new foster families. Like our calling in this is not to save the world. And, and so, and Evan's like, pull the mirror up. But like, your first time, this is it is going to change so much of the dynamic in your family. And so having parameters that you have agreed on with your spouse initially of like what your first placement could look like, and you're going to have to say no when your placement agent calls. And a lot of times in foster care, our families are not used to saying no to anything in life. They are servant-hearted people. Right. And so there's so much, I think, guilt and even maybe a sense of grief attached to that no. But once again, I always go back to the goal is for you to be in foster care for us, right? In the foster care system, maybe 5+ years. And if you go so far out of what those boundaries are that you initially set, then and it's unsustainable, and we lose you in 6 months or we lose you in a year, then that was not helpful for really any of us in either the agencies or the system or our church that's walking alongside.
Or the kids.
Yes, absolutely. The children in our home. And so I would say set your boundaries initially. And I always tell, especially new foster families, the right no is better than the wrong yes, right?
That's good.
Yeah.
And so it's okay. They will find a home that is the right yes for those kids. Don't be afraid to say no initially.
And I'll just say that just from a tangible standpoint, when the placement agency would call, initially they would call Kayla. And we did struggle at times because, bless her heart, she wanted to say yes.
I am always yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, we physically had to tell them,
Start
you
calling
need
you?
to call me. Because
Didn't we do
yeah,
this?
I'll be the
Didn't we do
gatekeeper.
this for a while?
So I think when that started happening, that alleviated a lot of.
That's a really we went.
But I will say, listen, I'm just going to play the other side here. I will say, and y'all surely can agree with me on this, I'm sure.
Oh, here we go.
There is a fine line, I feel like, though, because, there is a fine line of saying no, but then I feel like God can a lot of times do a lot with our yes whenever it is a little uncomfortable. I mean, I say that very light-handedly, I guess. You know what I mean?
We don't know,
Right.
the call that we're going to get, right?
Right.
But I'm saying if you and your spouse throughout class have maybe said, we can do one child between the ages of 0 to 5, and you get a sibling group of 5 that
Sure.
they're asking you
Sure.
about, and your
Yes.
and your wife is just or your husband
Right.
is so darn passionate,
Right.
this is it, this is the call.
Yeah.
It may not be, and that's okay as
Yeah.
well.
Oh,
So-
yes. Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is God going to stretch you in this? Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. In some ways, the image that comes to my mind is you're climbing Everest to some extent, and you have to be able to stop and take a break. You have to
Yeah.
know when. No, I can't do another mile today.
Right.
Or you have
Spot
to
on.
just to say, okay, because again, the idea is not just to burn out halfway up Everest.
Right.
The goal is to summit, whatever that summit looks like.
Right.
It's ambiguous, of course, but gosh, y'all touched on so many things. Just to close this out, you've two things particularly you've touched on that have really struck me. One is in regard to your own biological children. I'd love to know for you to share what the impact, good, bad, ugly, whatever, has been for you when it comes to your biological children. And then Ashley, I think that was you who said that, Evan. And then Ashley, you were touching on it takes, a group coming alongside you and supporting you. We'll just start with the first one I mentioned with how it's impacted your biological children. What have you witnessed? What have you seen? How putting your yes on the table into the world of fostering has impacted your bio kids?
I feel like for us, it's almost like you're watching these little missionaries, take in these strangers. And I mean, if you think about it, they have to share their home. They've got to share their toys, their stuff, their parents.
Yeah.
And suddenly, they might not have as much of their parents' attention as they did before, so it's a lot to ask of your kids too. But at the same time, we've been able to watch our kids, leverage everything. Sometimes my teenage daughter, might have to say no to friends because she's going to stay home with the kid if we've got to, whatever it may be. It's just, but they do it so, without question and without hesitation. And like you said, Evan, if my kids were standing here right now, they would say they would do it all over again. And they love,
and they do more. There's been phone calls that we get, and she'll be cooking dinner, and they'll be running around doing whatever, and she gets a phone call, and we talked about it, and we're like, no, not right now, because they'll always call, but she'll just be like, no, not right now, and one of them will go, what? Why not?
You say
Why don't you
yes?
say yes? And I'm looking over at him. I'm like,
we're not saving the world. To your point, yeah. We can't
right
have
now.
everybody in the house.
But they tend
Yeah. They have, honestly, it's like to see their faith become tangible and actually play out in their own home day in and day out with these kids. They love them. It doesn't matter the story. And the coolest part too is even the biological families, to see their hearts break for these families, whether it's the mom who was reunified with her kids, or it was, our little girl that we adopted who her mom is not in the picture at all. To see my kids' hearts break for her, and just they get it.
Yeah.
There's just a different level of faith and living out the gospel that you can see in your kids whenever you welcome a stranger into your home.
And I think, that's ultimately probably one of the things that holds people back from foster care the most is how this is going to impact your children that are already in your home, whether they be biological or adopted. Mm-hmm. But I would say that is definitely not the fear that you need to have. Ultimately, it is almost a countercultural way to parent when we invite and we take this step into foster care, because ultimately, culturally, we lift up children so much and elevate them, and that your needs, your wants, your activities, those are the priority. Those are the center of the home. And not that that's all going to go away, but that is not how the world is going to treat you when you leave us.
Right.
And so allowing them to see that there are people, that there are children that have other needs right now, greater needs, right? And even as a parent, even saying that, but they understand that there are times, there are moments that they're going to have to give up being with mom and dad, or that they're going to have to, miss out on not necessarily the big things that are still in their life, but maybe, they're not going to have exactly what they want for dinner, or all of these things. Those little tiny things, that is a part of becoming an adult, and understanding that there are people that have bigger needs than you in this moment. So I think that the level of maturity that it gave my kids, and understanding of the world around us, and really seeing like so much more brokenness and the hard and challenges and some poverty and all of this, right? That I had done such a great job of insulating them from in the first place. It is going to break that piece apart, but for the better, because my goal, my job, our jobs is to send out children into this world, that are prepared for that. And I do think that are going to be compassionate, that are going to see things with empathy and grace. And I don't think that there was a way that we could have prepared them and sent them out with that lens of the gospel, the way that the bringing foster care into our home has.
Yeah, for sure.
And just to comment on what you said about missionaries and, stepping into foster care as a family, it's so much more than what like a week in Romania or Guatemala or here in Jacksonville would ever. I mean, this is day in and day out, 24/7, 365 days a year.
You're inviting the mission trip into your home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so good. I mean, it sounds like it's in your experience so far. It's been a great impact.
That doesn't mean it wasn't hard.
Right.
Sure.
And sometimes it was seeing their joy, even in our hard days, that kept us going.
Yeah.
That like, okay, well, if they can do this, and if they're, then surely I can do this too, and it just would be just
days
what I needed.
that I felt like they loved better in some ways,
they
right?
do.
And that's inspiring to me as a parent.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
I
know
agree.
that, like, just in my background in pastoring, I mean, it's. I'll start with bad news before we get to the good news. 90+% of children active in the church walk away from their faith into their 20s, like 90+% statistically. But the good news is that, and they summed it up, the research summed it up in a study, the antidote to that, okay, is when they see parents who are consistently and radically living out their faith. It doesn't say living out their faith, but those are the key adjectives, consistently and radically. So you can say grace before dinner, but I don't think that really, maybe that checks the box of consistency, but I don't think, it certainly doesn't check the box of radical. But when you're inviting the mission trip into your house and you're living out the gospel actively like that, and you're saying, hey, we're all a family, we're going to do this together, that is consistency. And that's radical.
And too, especially as we have like older kids that are a part of this, we've asked their opinion, and
Family meeting.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
for sure.
Before we said yes to our last placement, we asked all of them, and it's so funny. We knew that our girls, man, you didn't have to ask. It was going to be a yes. Yeah. But we have 2 teenage boys in our house. We have a almost 16 and 17-year-old, and I mean, they've been doing this with us for 6 years. They've been raised with it at this point. And I think you are going to be in this with us, and your ability to contribute matters to us at this point. That doesn't mean that it's the ultimate say.
Sure.
We're still going to make, but how do you feel about a possibility of a placement of twins with special needs?
Yeah.
And both of our boys said yes. And our 16-year-old said, this is what we do. And to hear that from
cool.
a young man that just gets it, like, man, let's go, right?
Yeah.
This is what we do.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You all have been so great, shed so much light on this world here that can be so misunderstood. I'll get you out of here with one question. Ashley, you touched on it a little bit a few minutes ago, but just when it comes to people coming alongside you and wrapping around with their care and their love for you, I've heard you've all mentioned to me at different times in past conversations that I believe the number one reason that people jump out of the world of foster care is isolation and feeling lonely. I'm on an island. We're the only ones going through this. But, it sounds that the answer to that is people that can come alongside you, wrap around you with care. What has been your experience with that? And then just in general, what do you think that foster-friendly community coming alongside you, what does that look like?
Okay, I'll start here.
Yeah, man.
I'd say if you don't have that community, don't do it. Because you're right. You'll get burnt out really quick.
Or start building.
Or start building.
That needs to be,
start building. But don't do it now. You can wait until you probably need to wait until you get ready. Because and listen, everybody's different. But for me, again, I've talked about comfort a lot. I like that kind of stuff. And there's certain things that I like to do. I like to travel. I like to go on date nights. I don't want to if you can't take the time away a little bit, whether it be respite or whether it be a grandparent or whether it be, luckily we're fortunate enough to have some grandparents around that'll watch the kids, let us do date night or even do a weekend trip together. Yeah. And I love to do, just to get that little break.
Yes.
Hugely important in my mind. Just to kind of have that little break for a minute. You hit pause for a second, but then you come back a couple days later or that night after a little date night, and you keep on going. But if you don't have our disciple group was very instrumental in helping. When we said yes for I was going to really quick. The first time we said yes, we were at Disney World. Oh, woo. We got a call at Disney World,
happiest place
on earth, and we were at Disney. And I was ready to leave there the second we got there. But, we were with our kids and, we got a phone call and, they had a couple kids and, I was like, no, we don't want to do this yet. We just got through the classes and, and then something in me said, let's just, it was either later that night or the next morning. It's been a while back now. It said, you know what? Let's call and see if anybody's, said yes to them. And in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, please let somebody have said yes. Please let somebody have said yes. I mean, it's the truth.
Yep.
But
and it was outside of our boundaries too, because it was 2 kids.
Yes, it was outside of our boundaries, and I'd kind of really just said one.
Yep.
But God just kept tugging all night long, and that's not normal for me. It's just not. But it just kept. And so that next morning, I'm just calling, saying, "Yeah, we still got the kids. They're just, we're waiting for somebody to say yes. We've called 100 people. There's 2 of them. We don't want to separate them."
Yeah.
And so I'm just so we, because she's not going to do anything without.
I love that you're laughing over there.
Evan's like, yep.
Yeah. But as much as she would take all of them, she wouldn't say yes if I was totally, and so that's got to be an important part too. Both have to be in agreement. And so, we said yes to this, but I'm telling you, without the meals that we got, for a month from our disciple group, from just all the other foster families around the church that we're, this church that we're plugged into, I don't think we would have been able to do it.
And honestly, our disciple group for that year, I mean, it was we'd show up and it was okay, you guys decompress from your week, and it was just a place. It was a place where, they were, our people, and we could go and just be man, this week has sucked.
Yeah, we could
or this week has been great, whatever it was. But it was just a safe place, and we knew that we didn't have the kids around, and we could just be, And then this group of people would ultimately always remind us of, hey, what has God called you to do? Why are you doing this? And just put that back into perspective. And honestly, I don't think we could have done it without that disciple group. That first year for sure.
And that's such a huge part too of just the discipling in the gospel and how we walk this out is our ability as foster parents to help disciple others in the church and outside. And so, how we've done it as a church is mainly through those disciple groups. But as a church and how we engage in the importance especially of churches stepping into foster care, it isn't. I think it could be easy, especially for churches, to say, I have an idea, right? This is what we will do. And and never ask an agency or anybody else if that's actually a need in the community. And so we've kind of done that a little bit on the church side of things. And so, how we engage as a church should be done in collaboration as like the big church overall, right? And that we're not all doing the same thing, that we're not doing things that are just good ideas, that we're engaging with agencies and asking them what the needs are and how we can help, and that each church, based off of their mission, their vision, their heart, is engaging in how we care for children in our communities that need protection and a home in the season. And, it doesn't matter what that congregation does. What matters is that they're stepping in and doing something. And so, that they're able to share about, the importance of what the needs are here, that they are engaging in some way. And then also one of the biggest parts, as far as support in the community, support in the church, is this idea of trauma awareness. And so my kids, how your kids behave in Sunday school, especially post-removal day, is going to look different than what, Sally's a healthy 6-year-old with her adorable pigtails that, she's been riding a unicorn for the last 5 years, right? Her behaviors are going to look different than what our kids are. And is there grace? Is there compassion? Are our people trained in a way to engage and understand and empathize with our kids and know that their brains have been impacted by trauma and they're working through that and they're in, this healing phase. And so that is such a huge part as the church. If we are going to invite children, if we're going to invite the families in, then our childcare staff also has to be prepared to take that step and to care for our kids well. I had a mama tell me a few weeks ago that, and they've struggled so much with behaviors, but she said, I've never had a teacher excited to see my child. And man, like just the weight of that, right?
Yeah.
We as the church on Sundays have the opportunity to be excited to see these kids and to celebrate them and to recognize that they were made in the image of God and how important it is. And we don't know how long we have the ability to pour into them.
Yeah.
It could be one Sunday, it could be a month's worth of Sundays, but all of those matter because ultimately what they take from these moments with us here is going to impact them as they grow and get into adulthood. And if they had a negative experience while they were in church with us, then what are the chances of them coming back when they need help, when they need support, when they need loved, when they're at rock bottom? Whereas if we looked at them with compassion and grace and understanding and love, right? And that's what they knew while they were here. Ultimately, that should be our biggest hope is that someday they will come back again.
Yeah.
Maybe not to this direct church, but ultimately somewhere.
It applies to teenagers. I mean, stuff is, because we know our student ministry here will have children that are fostered in a foster home situation. They'll go to summer camp with us. And so it's Sunday mornings, your classic church setting, but it's also, it's, when they're with their disciple group as a 16-year-old and then handling that the right way. Just coming back to the piece of just the wraparound and having that community around you. I love what you said about how your disciple groups have come alongside y'all. And because I would imagine that it's not just, they're thinking, whoop-de-doo, it's Stouffer's lasagna. But to you, I would think it's more than that. It's that reminder of we're not in this by ourselves. And it's a reminder of the Lord's provision. And that the Lord, if the Lord's called you to something, He's going to get you through the thing as well. And one of the things I've loved that y'all have shared with me offline before as well, that it's not just the disciple group praying for you, which is huge, or bringing you the Starbucks right when you need it, or being the listening ear on the phone, but it's also like, a buddy of ours who said, like, you can just call and say, hey, I've got a plumbing need. It won't stop leaking, the shower won't turn off or whatever. And they go, hey, I'm not really called to foster care right now, but I own a plumbing company and I will come and I'll fix that faucet for you. Or, hey, let me do some of I own a lawn business, or I cut African-American hair. I mean, let me just come alongside you, even from a business side as well. So, I mean, it's the church being the church in the classic disciple group, Sunday school, student ministry format, but it's people that are like thinking, I'm a plumber all day. How could I be a part of this?
And I think, especially as a community, as, with the goal of being foster friendly and what that looks like, essentially it's that there's an invitation to all of us here into foster care, into caring for children. What that looks like for each of us is so unique. I wouldn't ever say that we should all, become foster parents. But to the plumber, we have space for you and your gifts that you have been given. And, to the restaurant, like we have space for you and
we will take your 50% off
discount. Yeah, we will take whatever discount, right? But ultimately, it's the ability for foster families in the community to be seen and welcomed, right?
Yeah.
When you walk in with 8 children into it's like party size at this point, right? But to know that this business loves us and sees our family and values it and that we will be welcomed there, right? And so I think it's the ability for all of us to engage in whatever first step that looks like for us, and especially business owners and the talent that they have that God has given them in that. Here's space for you to offer that, and if you're great at making a meal, if you're great at making, or sending cards, or if you are a prayer warrior, what does God have for you in this season we are in? And especially as a community, how are we inviting everybody and giving them space with their gifts to utilize those?
Yeah.
That's so good. Y'all, I can't thank you enough just for your time today. I mean, as I'm sitting here just processing and reflecting on everything that we've talked about over the last little bit, I mean, it's just been such a reminder of this is going to come with challenges. I mean, I appreciate your authenticity on that. You're not saying it's not going to be sunshine, rainbows, and cash prizes. It's going to be challenging. But I'm also hearing you say, yes, it's worth it, because it's an opportunity for you to grow. It's an opportunity for you to love in a deeper way and stretch the muscle of deepening your love for people. It's a chance for you to make a difference in the lives of children that absolutely need it. And honestly, the whole thing just smells like the gospel to me, as we've said before. And I'm just thankful for y'all's time and helping us kind of just figure this whole thing out together. And we'll just continue to pray for those families and what the next step is God's calling them to. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.